What's the funniest thing you've seen someone do that you weren't allowed to laugh at? At my friend's grandfather's funeral, the first sentence of the pastor's speech was, "We are all here because we love Dick so much." His name was Richard. This holy man gave a 15-minute speech about his love of Dick and how Dick changed his life. My wife and I did not make eye contact through the entire thing for fear of busting out laughing in a quiet, crowded church. It took me about a year to ask my friend his thoughts about it, and apparently he was close to losing it too. Helping a grade to CL but /8-year-olds, and one of the kids was just so loud. He was running around the CL but when one of the girls held out her arm and clotheslined him. I was able to keep a straight face for that, but she kneeled down and yelled, "D, boom. M, at him. M." He started crying. G, they both got a detention. N, and I almost bit through my tongue. E, oh no. This brought back memories of me when I was a kid with my mom and 15 families and 30 to 40 kids standing in a parking lot. Mom is trying to get everyone organized by grade, and this one kid that was in the year below me was tearing around, jumping into people, screaming and being a general terror. Mom turns to me and says, "Can you get him to stop?" Kid is running straight at me, so I step to the side and sweep his legs clear out from under him as he jumps. This wasn't a little trip. The kid hit the pavement/curb so hard both legs flew, folded over backwards, and almost kicked himself in the back of the head from the momentum. My mom screams, and I knew I screwed up instantly and turned only to see the kid's own mother just about folding herself over to keep from laughing. I just said, "What?" He stopped now. Poor kid had to get stitches, and I felt terrible about it for like a month. A guy was acting as his own attorney. He was questioning himself in court by standing up, asking a question, then sitting down to answer it. The judge finally looked at him and said, "Sit down, Mr. X." I almost lost it, but managed to hold my court demeanor. A friend of mine who was always late to work died after an epileptic fit. The undertakers and vicar got delayed, and he was late to his own funeral, and it was the most fitting and hilarious moment, and he'd have loved it. But obviously you can't burst out laughing when the staff at a funeral tell you that he's not there yet. Edit. Also, he only worked some days, so we called him Part-Time Pete, and in the long run he really was only here part-time. He always did like knocking off early. Somewhat similar. My cousin was always late for things when he was little because his mom would take just forever to do anything related to getting ready. Not that she had a lot to do, but was just a massive procrastinator. He got in the habit of jokingly telling people that she would even be late to his funeral. When he had passed away, his mom circled around the place until service had started before coming in, though that of course was done on purpose this time. Paramedic here. Watched a drunk falling down a bunch of stairs. He had several broken bones and looked like a brazil. He then just screamed at his friend to get him a new beer because he dropped his. Nearly pissed myself. RC Albert Salutatorian started her speech with, "Today we are here for our graduated cylinders. I mean our graduation," and went he, and at the time that she chuckled at her own joke, which definitely was a joke. I, a lone patron of comedy in a convention center of thousands, who was already on thin ice, let out a very audible laugh and woo, and the monitor, which was based on sound, cut to me as I laughed and caught the woo. I genuinely found it funny and could not stop laughing until well after the ceremony finished. So one time, me and my CL but we're watching a play where all the actors were both blind and deaf. At one point, they were walking on the stage with no one to guide them, and one of them fell off the stage. My mother-in-law was basically awful to me early in our relationship, called me names, made comments about my family, made comments about my upbringing in a trailer home. Really cool. I remember always trying to be the better person. Anyway, there was a big gathering of my wife's family. My mill was holding court and made a few shots at me at the dinner. She left to get something out of the kitchen at some point. On her return, someone had closed the screen door, and she walked right into it, mid-stride, mid-sentence. She made a hilarious noise. I almost guffawed, but my wife clenched my knee. I laughed on the inside, and pictured it whenever I needed a pick-me-up from her narcissistic victimhood. We are estranged from her now. Big shock. Edit. Thank you all for the support. It's been a rough journey sometimes. In bulk, I want to say that if you have someone with narcissistic personality disorder in your life, you don't have to put up with their abuse, even if they are family. Edit 2. Those of you saying my wife was in the wrong somehow should really research different effects of abuse. She has stood up for me more than enough and worked hard to be a good partner. The rest is meaningless to me. I was watching Hunger Games in theaters and the rude death scene caused a reaction from the person behind me that left me laughing so hard I thought the people who didn't hear her would think I was a horrible person. Right when the spear hits her, I heard the "so damn" from behind me, like the most stereotypical dumb reaction gif sound effect of a dude getting kicked in the nads. It clashed with the scene so much, and was the only time the person ever spoke. It just cracked me up. When my aunt died, I was heartbroken. I loved her very much. She was in a coma, and we had a sort of living wake for her. At her funeral though, I don't know, I must have been all cried out or something. True to her style though, she played the goddamn Collingwood theme song as the coffin left, and I lost my shit. I pretended to sob down the back of the church, but I was pissing myself laughing. Our teacher was scolding the CL but in his rage-induced lecture he accidentally knocked over a stack of graded papers onto the floor, ruining the perfect by name order he had them in. That's not what was funny. What was funny was he immediately said out loud, "Oh shucks," since he wouldn't swear. This came out of a man whose face was red as a lobster. I almost choked trying not to laugh. It was a small art gallery opening. The lady who owned it was a friend of my mother's, so we were invited, my mother, me, 16-yo, and my brother, to come to the very fancy high culture festivities. She had arranged some light entertainment in the form of her interpretive dancer. This podgy middle-aged lady in flowy fabrics with a scarf was flying around the small lawn, waving her scarf and arms about randomly and occasionally rolling about on the ground. I think it was accompanied by in-ear music. I could barely breathe and had to bite my tongue super hard and absolutely make sure I did not look at my mother or brother, or we would have all died of laughter. So the dean of our college had recently passed away due to cancer, and he was a nice/popular guy, so he was well liked by students and faculty. During an event to commemorate him, all the students and faculty gathered, and some people went on stage to share their memories of him. This one guy, a new student who barely knew him, goes up on stage and starts giving this really emotional speech. The only problem was that he was talking about another faculty member who was very much alive and had just gone abroad for a few months for training. The dude went into all the details about his life and even called him by name to make it evident what was happening. Turns out he thought the wrong guy was dead, and his attempt at an overly emotional speech made it worse. Looking at all the confused people on stage, the situation was very funny, but just before him, other students and teachers had given heartfelt eulogies for the dean, so it felt wrong to laugh at the time. But we crack up every time we remember that day now. My first time in Houston, a very large lady was going up a full escalator. Near the top, she suddenly fell into a low sitting position, as if her legs gave in. She didn't fall down the steps or anything. She was just stationary, no longer moving up with the escalator. Her size prevented anyone from passing around her, so everyone behind her began to walk backwards to not crash into her, some picking up their luggage. My stepdad was an Italian from Manhattan. He had the classic Italian mobster accent. We all live in Minnesota, born and raised, so his accent was definitely different from what we're used to. My brother loved to playfully make fun of him by imitating him by saying classic Italian mobster exclamations along with the hand mannerisms. Stepdad was a laid-back guy and found it funny, and the banter between those two was very light-hearted. So, one day, we were having a small get-together at our house with my mom, stepdad, my brother and a few friends. We were all hanging out outside when my 4-year-old daughter excited started saying, Uncle Paulie, watch this." As everyone watched, she went over to a piece of dog poop, pointed at it by shaking her open palmed hands, and exclaimed in the most perfect Italian mobster accent, "What the duck is the ice?" Exclamation mark. She even did the head bob perfectly. We all stifled laughter. I was once at a food and drink event that was put on by a very famous and eccentric German chef. When it was over, he invited my friend and I back to his farm for an after party. His farm famously hosts chefs from all over the world who live with him and learn from him. So as a young chef, this was a huge honor. My friend and I had quite a few cocktails, and when it was time for the famous chef to give us directions, he started drawing a map with all kinds of windy dirt roads. He kept saying, "And this road is windy, windy, windy. Windy, windy, windy," in his thick German accent, while scribbling all over the page. And it just kept going, to the point that my friend and I were visibly holding back tears of laughter. We ended up having an amazing time at the farm, but I'm 100% positive the chef did not like us at all after we laughed in his face while he tried to give us directions. I went to a Holy Rollers church with my friend in middle school. I had no idea her church would be like this. She had an emotional breakdown at the end of but and we went to the bathrooms so she could cry. Then we started walking back into the worship center where her mom, big woman, was, and some other people were still praying. I hear someone shouting, which wasn't hard to find at this church. As we get closer to the front, and it's her mom, speaking in tongues. It sounded like a Harry Potter spell chanted over and over again. Her hands were flailing in there and she eventually fell over to her right side and crushed a skinny guy next to her. I had to stifle my laughter so bad I almost peed. Later I told my friend that I was sorry her mom fell over in church, and she said she didn't fall. She was pushed. I was confused. I know I saw her fall. She looked me dead in the face and said she was pushed by the Holy Spirit. I threw my head back laughing, and me and her weren't very good friends after that. Just 2 nights ago, my picky daughter was telling us that she didn't like meatloaf. No way. No how. Then she described a Japanese hamburger steak that she wanted to make. Hamburger, breadcrumbs, egg, ketchup, soy sauce, etc. When she was done, I said that she described the exact thing sitting on her plate, and she got really mad. Laughing only made her madder. Couldn't stop laughing though. One time during a high school assembly commemorating Anzac Day, we had a veteran come to speak about his experience of war. For context, Anzac Day is like the Australian version of Veterans Day. As he spoke, the veteran began with this deep gravella voice, but partway through his story, he coughed and cleared his voice and began speaking with a significantly higher pitched voice. High school me found this sudden shift in voice far funnier than it actually was, and I tried my hardest to hold in my laugh, all the while looking to my classmates to see if anyone shared my feelings. They did not. My classmates were all somber and listening intently as the veteran spoke of the friends he had lost during a battle. It was one of those things where, by holding in the laughter, it kind just grew and grew, and for several minutes, I was just looking down, shoulders shaking uncontrollably from trying to hold it in. Anyway, after several minutes, I just cracked and just burst into laughter just as the veteran paused from getting emotional. And as terribly inappropriate as it was just this amazing relief, like finding a place to pee after holding it in for several hours. Teachers did not share my relief and were clearly disgusted, as they should have been. Classmates were perplexed, rightly so, and I was immediately sent outside and absolutely screamed at by my homeroom teacher. Watched a kid knock himself out with a rifle butt. Background: high school JROTC. One of the drill team cadets was trying to learn a spin trick with an M1 Garand. He got it once, shouted, "Hey, watch this," and spun it again. Clocked himself in the temple, and it was lights out. I couldn't laugh because I was the most senior cadet on deck and had to take care of his sorry ass. In boot camp, the drill instructors are constantly trying to get you to break your bearing, get you to show emotion, or like you're being affected by what's going on around you. Turns out one of the best ways to do this is to be violently funny people who constantly pepper the most creative insults into their tirades. And occasionally they venture into pure lunacy. So during range week, when we were in the pits pulling targets, one of the recruits was ducking around, not taking things very seriously. So our heavy informed him that if he wasn't going to be serious, he was going to skip up and down the line of targets, shouting a very specific phrase: "Fire the candy cannons. Coat the town with marshmallows." Apostrophe. Said recruit was, predictably, not very enthusiastic about being forced to do this, and he half-heartedly mumbled while he was moving down the line. Our heavy was displeased with this performance and exhorted him to improve thusly. No, with feeling. Like this. Fire the candy cannons. Coat the town with marshmallows. With such a savage mocking of the fake British accent, a lot of theatre kids pick up that it almost had to be informed by personal experience. Ridiculous then. Ridiculous now. Probably ridiculous on my death. You're not allowed to laugh at a funeral, right? Well, we all did. So I guess this counts. At my grandmother's funeral, when the priest asked us all for a moment of silence to remember my grandmother, my 5-year-old brother, amidst all the silence and hushed crying and tears, saw the priest lighting candles and started singing at the top of his lungs. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Apostrophe. He turned one of the saddest moments of my life into the funniest thing I've ever seen. Back when I was about 19 years old, I met up with a young woman at a coffee shop near the beach. Mere seconds after we had collected our drinks and sat down to talk, a loud series of sounds, a screech, a pop, and a crunch became audible from outside. It turned out that someone had lost control of their car, plowing it into a nearby tree. A dozen or so people crowded around the window to gawk, and there was a collective gasp as the driver emerged from her vehicle, revealing that her head was bleeding. One of the CAF's employees went to call the paramedics, and my date asked if we should try to help the woman. I was about to respond with my agreement, but the words never came out, largely because they were stifled by barely contained laughter. I'm not a monster, I swear. See, at the exact moment that I'd been about to speak, an enormous, almost spherical man on a motorized bicycle had come riding into view. He looked to be about 50, had an expression of intense concentration on his face, and was moving so slowly that it really seemed like he should have toppled over. All of the man's limbs were frozen in place, statue-like, as the dull whine of the vehicle's tiny motor struggled to inch him forward. I don't know why I found that so hilarious, but I couldn't contain my amusement. Worse still, the look of horror on my date's face somehow only made the whole situation funnier. The man on the moped crept by as if in slow motion, looking for all the world like only a powerful psychic effort was keeping him from capsizing. And all the while, I kept right on laughing. We didn't have a second date. TL. Doctor, laughter and a literal collision combined to create a figurative wreck. In-app biology per teacher was giving a lesson with the door open. With how our classrooms were situated at the time, the special ed room was right across the hall. One of the kids began to throw a tantrum and was screaming/moaning full volume. Well, I guess the screaming sounded awfully like a race cab, so a kid in our CL butt began miming out shifting gears in the back of the CL butt with really exaggerated movement. Keep in mind our teacher never once stopped to close the door and just kept teaching as if nothing's happening. And I'm off in the corner ducking, dying because some kid is just Tokyo drifting in the back as well with some autistic kid as the soundtrack. CK. It was just so bizarre in what was normally a pretty boring setting. NG. Absolutely hilarious. I was at a family reunion when my toddler cousin face planted on a coffee table. He was fine, but it was very loud and it caused the adults to flock to him and console him. Meanwhile 13-year-old me is laughing his butt off and can't stop. I got a lot of dirty looks which only made me laugh more. I blame AFV for conditioning me to delight at misfortune. We were 16 and a friend's birthday party. 4 in the morning the 8 of us decide to go to the nearby elementary school to run around the roof. 2 of the boys tipped over a porta potty. On the walk home the cops roll up and make us return to the school to make sure we didn't do any more damage. As we were walking into the front gate, one of the officers had climbed over a fence to look around. As he was climbing back over, his nightstick got caught in the fence and he fell on his butt next to all of us. I'm surprised no one bud through their lip trying not to laugh. As an added bonus, my friend's mom was so pissed at us when she picked us up from the school that she wasn't paying attention and backed up into one of the cop cars. At a wedding a few years ago, me and my mate were sat at the back row during the ceremony, along with a family who we didn't know. About midway through the ceremony, when it's really quiet, one of the children during the service let rip what sounded like a massive fart. But judging by the lack of reaction from the rows further up front, I guess it couldn't have been that loud. Anyway, me and my mate were holding back tears of laughter as to not disrupt the ceremony, whilst the family were obviously in a mixture of embarrassment and holding back their own laughter. It was like a secret we all shared on that row about one of their smelly little shits of a child. I guess I could have laughed, but it felt wrong to do so. Please click subscribe if you enjoyed this video.